Tropical storm Nate expected to form and may strike U.S. Gulf Coast and Florida. A festering mass of thunderstorms in the southwestern Caribbean has gradually become better organized and was declared the 16th tropical depression of Atlantic hurricane season Wednesday morning by the National Hurricane Center. The depression is likely to become the season's 14th named storm, called Nate. Very soon, the depression could strengthen substantially over the coming days and make landfall along the U.S. Gulf Coast between Louisiana and Florida's west coast late Sunday as a hurricane. New Orleans, Mobile, Alabama, Pensacola, Florida, Apalachicola, Florida, and even Tampa are among population centers the system could directly impact. The system is forecast to continue strengthening over the Gulf of Mexico and could affect portions of the northern Gulf Coast as a hurricane this weekend, with direct impacts from wind, storm surge, and heavy rainfall, the National Hurricane Center said Wednesday. However, it is too early to specify the timing or magnitude of these impacts. Currently centered east of Nicaragua, the depression is expected to drift northwestward near the coastline of Nicaragua and Honduras Thursday, where tropical storm warnings are in effect. Rainfall totals of 15 to 20 inches, with locally higher amounts, are predicted in parts of Nicaragua. On Friday, computer models forecast it to pass over the Yucatan Peninsula, near Cancun, or just to the east through the Yucatan Channel, between the Yucatan Peninsula and Cuba. It should reach the Gulf of Mexico by late Friday, and pick up speed as it moves northward or northeastward Saturday. By Sunday, it is likely to be bearing down on the Gulf Coast, because the system may interact some with land, including Nicaragua and Honduras, and then perhaps the Yucatan Peninsula. The intensity forecast is very difficult, however, there is some potential for it to intensify rapidly. The sea surface temperatures, which serve as fuel for tropical weather systems, are very high from the southwest Caribbean to the Yucatan Channel and into northeastern Gulf of Mexico, generally 0.5 to 2 degrees above normal. Furthermore, ocean heat content, a measure of the depth of warm water, is also very high in this region, the highest of any part of the Atlantic Ocean basin. Given all of these factors, it is almost a given that this will become a tropical storm. The question is where the ceiling lies for its strength. Rapid intensification is a possibility over the northwestern Caribbean or southern Gulf of Mexico while the system is traversing rather warm and deep waters, although it remains to be seen how separate the depression becomes from a larger gyre over Central America, the National Hurricane Center said Wednesday. Models mostly do not predict this to become a hurricane. They mainly cap it at a strong tropical storm, probably because of interaction with land and perhaps some dry air feeding into the system. However, the National Hurricane Center's official forecast is for this depression to make landfall along the Gulf Coast as a Category 1 hurricane Sunday. Expect this intensity forecast to evolve as the system develops and models and forecasters get a better handle on how it is interacting with the environment. The exact timing of a cold front sweeping toward the east coast will be a huge factor as to the landfall location. A speedier cold front would push the storm farther east toward Florida. Alternatively, a slower front would allow the storm to travel more due north toward Louisiana on the western periphery of a large area of high pressure over the western Atlantic Ocean. Interests from the Louisiana-Texas border to southwest Florida should carefully monitor this system. After probably making landfall Sunday, the depression should get drawn northward into his front charging toward the east coast. Heavy rain could surge up much of the eastern seaboard from south to north between late Sunday and early Wednesday. From south to north, amounts may be held somewhat in check because it should move through quickly, but several inches could certainly fall in some or many locations. The development of this depression is occurring in the region most conducive to storm formation at this time of year. Historically, most October hurricanes have been born in the far western Caribbean Sea. As credit to the skill of American and European long-range forecast models, recall this is the same system we discussed in last Thursday's article. The European and U.S. long-range models are hinting at a possible development in the southwestern Caribbean and then a track toward the north, which would bring the system toward the Yucatan and Cuba in about 10 days. 6 days have elapsed since that outlook, and it seems right on track. Nate, assuming it forms as predicted, is a storm name that is still around from its inception on the list of storms in 1981. It was used in 2005 and in 2011, but has not yet been retired. A tropical depression in the Caribbean was expected to strengthen to Hurricane Nate by the time it enters the Gulf of Mexico on Saturday, with landfall occurring somewhere between southeast Louisiana and Florida on Sunday. The National Weather Service said the storm shifted slightly westward by about 30 miles during the day Wednesday and is forecast to make landfall Sunday near Destin, Florida, said National Weather Service forecaster Phil Grigsby. But there's still a big spread and a lot of uncertainty, Grigsby said. Grigsby said that uncertainty means the storm could make landfall anywhere between southeast Louisiana in the Plaquemines Parish area and eastward along the Gulf Coast to the Tallahassee area of Florida. He cautioned that residents from Florida to Louisiana should keep an eye on it until we know better where it's going. At 10 p.m. Wednesday, the system was moving northwest near 6 miles per hour, a motion expected to continue through early Thursday. It's expected to shift more northerly and gain speed on Thursday and Friday. Maximum sustained winds were near 35 miles per hour. The storm was forecast to enter the Gulf on Saturday approximately 1 p.m. with 80 miles per hour winds, said Grigsby, who works in the Weather Service's New Orleans, Baton Rouge regional office. Grigsby said the storm was still a tropical depression about 4 p.m. Wednesday. Alec Rotman, another National Weather Service meteorologist working in the regional office, said that Louisiana residents likely will begin seeing the effects of the storm this weekend as chances for rain increase, along with strong easterly winds that will bring higher tides along the coast. From Louisiana to Florida, we need to closely monitor this every day for the next several days to see where it will go, Rotman said of the path the storm will take. While it's the 16th tropical depression this year, it will be the 14th named storm, a category that includes hurricanes and tropical storms, when it becomes Tropical Storm Nate, said Barry Keem, Louisiana's state climatologist. The average, he said, is 12 named storms. He said, this certainly ranks among the busier seasons. Keem said, the year 2005, the year of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, when sea surface temperatures were running very high, holds the historic record of having the most named storms, with 18 at this point in October that year. He said, among this year's named storms were the 5 major hurricanes Irma, Harvey, Maria, Lee and Jose, each bringing major destruction and loss of life. Very warm sea surface temperatures in the tropical Atlantic and relatively low wind shear, winds blowing at very high altitudes, are 2 factors figuring into the active 2017 hurricane season, Rotman said. An increase in wind shear can blow apart storms, Rotman said. And, he said, 2017 is not an El Niño year, referring to the periodic warming of water in the Pacific that impacts weather patterns globally. One effect of El Niño is an increase in winds at upper levels that can suppress hurricanes, Rotman said. Is global warming making it worse? There are lots of opinions on that, Keem said. There's one model of continuous warming of the planet that shows there's likely to be the same or a fewer number of storms, but the ones we get would be stronger, he said. Also to be considered, he said, is a long-recognized weather pattern called the Atlantic multidecadal oscillation, characterized by periods of low hurricane activity for 30 to 40 years, followed by periods of great activity with warmer sea temperatures for another 30 to 40 years. The 1920s to the 1960s was a period of high hurricane activity, while the 1960s to the mid-1990s was not, Keem said. We're in this active cycle that started in 1995, he said. While the hurricane season officially begins every year on June 1 and ends November 30, it typically peaks on September 10, Keem said. The weeks before that point, from mid-August to the first week in October, are considered the prime time for named storms. After that, the chances diminish. But they happen, he said. As far back as the mid-1800s, Louisiana has been impacted by 5 hurricanes that came in October, including the deadly Chenier came in at a hurricane on October 2, 1893, that devastated the island by that name and killed 2,000 people. The most recent October hurricane was Hurricane Lily that made landfall in Louisiana on October 3, 2002. Hurricane 1 in 1985 lingered in Louisiana over 3 days at the end of October, holding the latest landfall record in Louisiana since record-keeping began in the state in 1851. "We were still dealing with it on Halloween night," Keem said. "As the seasons began to change with the approach of fall, so do the origins of hurricanes," Krotman said. "Earlier in the hurricane season, they start as tropical waves off the African coast," he said. "As fall approaches, trade winds in the Atlantic begin to weaken, minimizing those conditions," he said. "Later in the season, hurricanes tend to start in the western Caribbean, where the water is still very warm," he said.